Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me tonight, our co-host, Bandu Nair. Good evening. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good, Buford. Thanks. A little worse for the wear, but still.
Well, we've got a slightly different show tonight. Dean Becker has provided us with some film clips from his social forum. So during the evening, we will be showing 3 or possibly 4 different clips from that event, and then with time after them for people to call in with comments or questions, or for us to comment about them.
All right, we always welcome callers to call in. We'll be showing the number shortly after this on the bottom of the screen.
So what new has been happening in the world?
Well, yeah, as far as current events go, something pretty interesting in Texas has gone on. New legislation that the exact requirements, I'm really not sure, but under 2 ounces of marijuana possession is now up to the peace officer or the police discretion of whether to go with the whole arrest, incarceration, and trial, or to basically use it as a ticketable offense or to throw out the charge. At first, what I thought of this was that it was kind of a bunk law, that it really wouldn't change anything because essentially, anyone who's heard horror stories or stories of, man, I got away this one time, that it kind of essentially is up to the college or to the police discretion, in that they can choose whether to throw out the charges, throw out the possession, throw out whatever it is, the paraphernalia, weed, whatever. But as we were discussing before the show, this is a good opportunity for grassroots, for organizations to go to your city councils, because essentially the city is what's going to tell the policemen, such sanctions as they've had in parts of California, where to make possession and, especially marijuana possession, the least offense to look for.
Yeah, this has to be coupled with another practically unknown statute that was passed a session or 2 ago, which actually allows municipal governments to establish law enforcement priorities, at least as far as some drug offenses are concerned. Mm-hmm. And if, for instance, a city government were to instruct the police that in exercising their discretion they should use arrest on marijuana cases only in the most severe cases or those which involve breach of public peace, then in effect the city government would have some control over how that discretion is exercised.
Right. So I think this is the closest to a ballot initiative type of thing that we can get in Texas, is going lobbying your city council. Well, and I think we have a caller, it might be Dean, who has done this before. I know you've gone before to Houston City Council and lobbied them to make this a lowest law enforcement priority. Let's go ahead and turn to the phone right now.
Okay.
See what we've got.
Hello, caller.
Hi, Buford, this is Dean Becker.
Yes, sir, Dean.
Hi, to you and Bendu. I wanted folks to know a little more about me. I am a former cop, current member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and I'm also a producer for the Drug Truth Network. Today, I just wanted to alert you guys to, and your viewers, to a few things about the videos you're going to broadcast a little later.
Okay.
The first 3 are some serious stuff I taped at the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta.
Okay.
And first up, you'll see Nora Callahan. She's the director of the November Coalition for a prisoners' rights organization. Second is Aaron Dixon from Seattle. He's the director of Center House, which helps young blacks and ex-prisoners to get back on track. Third is Teresa Aviles. Her son was sent to federal prison for more than 20 years for a drug conspiracy, and he also died in that prison a few years later of unknown causes. And then I guess fourth, to break you from those stories of the abuses of the drug world, we're going to have a segment from Mr. Tommy Chong from his visit to the Century of Lies radio program, actually a few months ago. And I just wanted to invite folks to listen, if they would, to KPFT radio. It's at 90.1 FM in Houston, 89.5 FM in Galveston. And they can hear the 420 Drug War News each afternoon, Monday through Saturday at 4:20 p.m. Century of Lies airs on Friday at 1 p.m. Cultural Baggage airs on Fridays at 7 p.m. And this week's Century of Lies features 3 interviews with medical marijuana proponents. Cultural Baggage will feature an interview with Jay Fisher. We'll do that live. He's the current Assistant Attorney General of Georgia and a fellow member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. You can hear hundreds of such programs and see nearly 24 such videos online at my website, which is drugtruth.net. I'll see your audience next week. I understand, Buford, you're going on sabbatical.
Oh, I'm going to take about a month off and recharge some batteries, I think.
Well, it's always a good idea.
Yeah.
You need to do it once in a while. I hope to edit down some footage I captured in Bolivia at the end of last year, and I'll tune in and enjoy the program. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to your viewers.
We're always happy to have you. And Dean, you're using the title Century of Lies. And when I heard the sad news today about Lady Bird Johnson's death at age 94, it struck me that she's only 2 years older than the Harrison Narcotics Act.
Yes.
So we really are approaching that landmark of a century of lies.
And one of the few left who saw the change. I was always proud to speak to Milton Friedman. He was also of that same age bracket, and he certainly saw the changes and was very adverse to what we've wrought here, I suppose.
Yeah. So, and it's hard to work when none of us, even geezers like me, are really old enough to remember a time when things were different.
Exactly. We
No,
were all
imagine
just
the future.
accustomed to this madness.
Right.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
In addition to being a proponent, activist, minister, ex-cop, he's also a speaker for LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
Yes.
And so for key clubs, Kiwanis Rotary clubs, he can be asked to speak. Also, LEAP changed their website. You can now sign up for and log on to their website and have different updates through their website. So it's pretty neat.
And LEAP, just to expand it, is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I guess with that introduction, if we're ready in the control room, why don't we look at what Nora Callahan of the November Coalition has to say?
My name's Nora Callahan, and I'm the Executive Director of the November Coalition. And we're a group that formed in 1997 to warn our fellow citizens about the injustices of the war on drugs. And mainly that injustice has showed itself in the proliferation of prisons, to the point that in 10 years, following the mid-'80s changes in drug laws, we went from prison expansion to absolutely being able to see a vast prison industrial complex across the United States. And we formed to warn people that the prisons were being built for them, not for other people. About 18 years ago, my brother was sentenced to 27 and a half years in federal prison for a drug law violation. And I went to his trial, later went to his sentencing, and I found out that it wasn't unusual for someone to have this happen. And when he was first indicted, I thought the whole thing was unusual. But by the time he was sentenced, I was able to begin to realize that this was happening in courtrooms throughout the United States, that people were being sent to prison on words of other people. And that's what the drug war is about. More than it's about drugs. It's about how many people they can imprison. And when I say they, I'm saying our United States government. And they do it on the basis of words. And using people who are caught with drugs, they tell them, in order to get out of this penalty, this prison sentence, we need you to cooperate. And so people who are fearful of long years in prison will then cooperate and become de facto police. and informants and confidential informants, or they will wear a wire, go out on the street and create crime for the police, so that then they can turn around and arrest more people, threaten them, put those people out on the street with drugs or cash to entice more people into crime, drug crime primarily, and then arrest still more people. And it's been this vicious cycle that now has been manifest by a lot more violence on the street, because no one wants to do 30 years. So when we say they, who is that? Those are regular people who are brought into a police station and said, someone has told us, and when they say someone, they don't have to tell you who it is. Confidential informants are just that. They're confidential, not to the police. Police know who they are, but they're confidential to the public. And so facing years and years or even decades behind bars, human frailty is such that they will save themselves. And they do. So they cooperate, and then more people, usually a circle of perhaps drug involved, but not necessarily, end up then indicted, and the heat's off that person. They may go on with their life. Some don't. Sometimes confidential informants have told us that 10 years after the fact, they're still called or visited by the police when they need help with a particular drug conspiracy in the region. So these people are never really off, many of them are never really off the hook. Some of them go into the witness protection program, but the witness protection program is such that very few people are protected once they become a witness. So, and that's wherein the danger lies. We've created a lot of violence because there's many people who will use violence rather than face a 30-year prison sentence they don't deserve. Well, this conference is different from many in that there's a lot of issues. Social Justice Forum simply means that people who've been affected by terrible policies all over the globe are coming together to share our mutual concerns and also to try to develop a strategy that will bring us out from so much oppression. And there are all kinds of oppressions. So we've been attending workshops that are not necessarily on our particular focused issue of drug war injustice. We've attended forums about water security. And people might ask, well, what does that have to do with the war on drugs? What does water supplies have to do with the war on drugs? One of the things we all have in common is when we look at what is the problem, it's often a very large business called a corporation who's making extreme amounts of profit on people who have to suffer from the policies they promote, mostly to our Congress, by way of giving them a lot of money to do and make laws that will benefit them. And so when, for instance, when we look at water, the connect is, for instance, most of the new prisons in the United States are built in rural areas. And they're built near fragile aquifers, meaning we've taken, put a stack of human beings over a limited water source. And we've learned to call it unsustainable human density. So one of the things we're doing as we meet people who are concerned with water supply and quality is to make them aware that in rural areas in the United States, where many of the resources are becoming things that rural people are looking at as assets, like in our area they're figuring out, because we have a lot of water, how we might sell some. And yet they're planning to put a 4,500 bed facility. Police have been talking about putting that over the water source we have, the drinking water source, which is diminishing quickly. And prisons are a mass of humanity planted in one small space that use up a lot of water and output a lot of sometimes very dangerous chemicals, because very often factories are attached to prisons these days. So as we have conversations with people who are dealing with water, we want them aware of this proliferation of the prison industrial complex, because it does threaten our water. It also has connects with food security. Yesterday we learned about companies like Monsanto who have these seeds that they sell. They don't allow any seed saving and collection. The new Iraqi constitution doesn't allow farmers and gardeners to own seed, food seed. And the connects we see in the drug war is then some plants governments deem illegal. They, in effect, own the plant. They might allow pharmaceuticals to do some growing and harvesting, but the ordinary indigenous peoples of the whole globe are finding medicines and foods they're not able to produce, grow, and the connects are there. And mostly we all are finding the commonality of the greed, the idea that a few people would get rich by making a policy that would devastate thousands of people, that those policies need to go. And so basically it feels good to be among thousands and thousands of people who do find a lot of common ground in our various focused struggles. And that's what the social forum is about, an exchange of ideas, and also to inspire us to know that there are thousands and thousands of people that will go home to their respective communities and continue to struggle against what we feel is mostly a lot of people who don't care about the future, but they will take everything they can now. And prisons are that. I mean, if we cared about our future, would we be building cages for our youth? Our website is located on the internet at november.org. And there people can find hundreds and hundreds of stories of how injustice has impacted human beings in mostly our country, but also around the world. And the hope of the future is the presence of so many youth who are determined to build a better world.
We're back. I think possibly to start a discussion of this, it might help to review a few numbers. In 1986, when the war on drugs really began to be prosecuted with some viciousness, the total jail and prison population in the United States was about 400,000 people. It's now up well over 2 million people, and the number of those on drug offenses alone is around 450,000, or more than the total prison population of 1986. In the federal prisons, the majority of the prisoners substantially are there for drug offenses. Last year, the arrests for marijuana offenses alone in this country were around 780,000. So it's become really somewhat of a problem. And if we look at things like California in particular right now is in a state of major crisis because their prison system is so overstuffed that it's literally on the verge of
Houston
collapse.
itself is going through the same problem where even moderately and conservative organizations are realizing this problem and writing about it.
Yeah, and if we look here at home, we have the current dilemmas in Houston of jails that are operated well past capacity.
Mm-hmm. We had a guest on here who was from the Houston jailing system who could attest to having overcrowding of the jails and having not enough cells, not even having adequate booking time, and having people staying well past their time just because they couldn't process the paperwork. We might have another caller, but something that I thought was, let's go ahead and take that caller.
Okay. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'm calling from Houston. I'd like to just tell you about my experience regarding all of this. I was the foreman of the grand jury in Houston about 10 years ago, and I was amazed to find out that 80% of all the people who were indicted at the time that I was for about 5 months that I was the foreman of the grand jury, and although I was trying to probe and find out what was the real reasons and all that, there were certain rules that we had to indict regardless of, even if it was a little roach that was found in a person's car's ashtray.
And what do you mean by little rules?
Right?
What do you mean by little rules that you had
But
to...
the rules were like the prosecutor would come in and say, look, I mean, you must indict if there are certain things that were, for instance, if they saw this little roach in an ashtray, or if they saw a little bit of like talcum powder on the floor, and it turned to be that it was a residue of cocaine. Maybe it was like 1/100th of a gram. For some reason, I mean, we were told you have to indict. Those were kind of certain rules that were, regardless of the story, regardless of what we thought, whether it was right or wrong, we had to indict, which was an awful thing. And also, the sheriff would come in and would boast about his population in the prison system. It's all about what makes money for the attorneys, for the judges, for the whole system. It is just really unbelievable what I witnessed for about 5 months. Another thing is, when we were trying to get some people not to be indicted, in other words, to be no-billed, the prosecutor would take it to another grand jury and try to get them indicted a second time by some other jury. It is really, it's unbelievable what's going on. I can tell you stories all day long about it. It's very, very sad what's going on.
Thank you for that information. That was very informative.
Right. I'm so glad that that guy called in, because this makes me want to bring up something that I've kind of been reading about, but I don't know enough about, the Fully Informed Jury Association. And in alcohol prohibition during those times, 60% of cases were actually overthrown by a fully informed jury association type of vote. From what I understand, and I think this is what he said when it was a no bill, and then the prosecutor would take it to another jury in order to try to get it indicted.
You have to remember the distinction here between the grand jury and the pettit or trial jury.
Right.
The grand jury is a hand-picked group of people selected by a group of commissioners who are picked out by the judge. Their responsibility is to look at information that comes to them to determine whether there's probable cause to charge someone with a crime. Now, the problem is, grand juries have become captives of the district attorneys. The cynical lawyer's joke is that a DA can indict a ham sandwich. There are no rules like what he was talking about. Those are made up by the prosecutor.
Right.
The fully informed jury thing is basically the trial jury
Right.
can always quit for no reason at all. Let's see what this other caller has to say. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I also was on a grand jury. I don't want to, jeopardize the secrecy.
Right.
I do want you to know that Judge Mike McSpadden wrote a letter to the legislature encouraging the legislature to look at lessening the possession laws here in Houston.
Yes, I didn't know that, but he's not the only judge that has made statements to that effect.
And I hate to say this, but I don't mean to besmirch the police department, but years ago we had what we called throw down guns, and I believe a lot of now is throw down drugs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
you.
Way back in my beginning days as a baby lawyer in Lubbock in the 1970s, very frequently marijuana was sold or kept in matchboxes. And the joke around the courthouse at that time was, gee, this matchbox has already been introduced in 6 different trials. A book that I have been insisting for some time that is required reading for anyone claiming to be an American citizen is Actual Innocence by Barry Schecht and Peter Neufeld of Project Innocence. And in this book, what they did was take the cases which Project Innocence had managed to get overturned with DNA evidence and analyze them for what led to the wrongful prosecution. And in roughly half the cases, I don't remember exactly now, police or prosecutorial misconduct of one kind or another was involved. False evidence, subornation of perjury, faked evidence, planted evidence. I mean, it's really scandalous, and there's no oversight for prosecution and police in our system today.
Right. Well, I think another reason for, not mistrial, but just a misrepresentation of the actual truth of the case, Nora Callahan was talking about in her clips, is that while snitches and informants, snitches just brings up a whole new can of worms, but while they are kept confidential, there's no public record, there's no way for anyone to actually know what type of discussion.
Actually, someone right now is running a website identifying them. The problem is snitches don't snitch for free.
Right, exactly.
And
they snitch for their own freedom in lieu of someone else's, regardless of how much they have to snitch or how true it is.
Yes, and confidential informants have a very, very, very horrible history. And I think one of the more startling cases happened in the Southeast, in which a guy in jail actually made a substantial fortune because he would find out someone in jail awaiting trial on something. His people outside would investigate the case and find out the secret things that only the perpetrator supposedly would know. They would tell him about it in jail. He would make up a snitch's report that included these things and receive money for it. I mean, and the cynical side of me would point out, if we look at our current cause celeb of Scooter Libby, there were two people who had the key to Scooter's jail cell. The president swapped his key for silence before the prosecutor could swap his key for talk. And Scooter is the kind of person that with the right pressure could certainly have told some very good stories in return for not going to jail. And it also causes problems. One story I remember a few years back from California, a young man, 16 or 17, I mean, he was still a juvenile, was picked up on a minor marijuana possession charge. Before he was booked, before he was even allowed to call his parents, certainly before a lawyer was involved, the police pressured him and said that if he would go out and make an undercover buy for them so that they could arrest the drug pusher, they would turn him loose. He agreed and got shot and killed when the deal went wrong.
Oh, wow.
I mean, confidential informants have been an element of law enforcement since at least the days of the Roman Republic, if not before. And they've stunk to high heaven the whole time they've been there.
It's certainly a good way to bias the trial in your favor, or bias the evidence, or the
well, it's not bias the evidence, it's create evidence.
Right. Another thing that Nora Callahan mentioned, and this was pretty interesting, was likening the waste of our prison resources. It's wasting water. It's just as, this is a huge industry. This is a huge waste of water. This is, a natural resource that's very scarce to us. She's protecting the environment. We need to get rid of prison systems. Another resource that's hugely used up, that's scarce to some people, is money. It's a huge pecuniary issue.
Well, if you look at the Texas legislature this last session, the major problem they faced was coming up with enough money for education.
Right.
At the same time, we are supporting the bloated second largest prison system in the country. I mean, let's compare where we send our dollars. But the biggest waste of natural resources caused by prisons is the waste of human lives. If we take an 18 or 19-year-old who's sent to prison for 10 years for selling marijuana or even selling cocaine, that 10 years he's sitting in prison are the years that he normally would be educated, would establish a job or a career, would become a productive citizen. Instead, he misses out that entire building period of his life. He hangs around with full-time criminals. When he comes out, he has a felony record so that it becomes practically impossible to get a job. In many cities, he can't even rent an apartment to live in, and he's become a full-time load. I'm told it's time for us to take a break. When we come back, we'll look at some more films.
Sometimes when we have a problem, we only use one tool. It works pretty good most of the time, so we keep on using it. Pretty soon, when your only tool is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. With prisons overflowing with nonviolent drug offenders, it's time to try some new tools. Drug prohibitionists beat the drum for more jail time, but that has been a self-defeating policy. If someone has a problem with drugs, they need medical help, not incarceration. The drug war is doing more harm than good, and it's time for a change. By reducing the consequences of prohibition, we can deal with the real issues involved in a rational drug policy. There are better tools. If you would like to help reduce the harm caused by the drug war, please visit our website at dpft.org.
It's time to go in a little different direction now, and even though it will be another tape from the social forum, it arises in Seattle, which is in King County, Washington. Seattle is an unusual place for drug law. The King County Bar Association, normally about as uptight and a conservative group as you can find, have been very instrumental and forward-thinking in drug reform for over a dozen years. Seattle has had several innovative programs for street crime, homeless, street kids, and drug use. So a lot of times when we look for new ideas about drugs, Seattle's a place to look. So why don't you tell us who's going to be our next?
Right. We look forward to seeing what comes out of Washington State as far as drug policy reform goes. They've always been a front runner. And this next clip is Aaron Dixon from Center House in Seattle.
My name's Aaron Dixon. I am the founder of Central House, a nonprofit that works with young people and young adults. Well, I ran for U.S. Senate against Maria Cantwell. Of course, one of the main issues with my campaign was the war in Iraq, but really the most important issue for me was the war on drugs. Our campaign theme was out of war into our community. And we recognize that anybody who does any type of work in poor, oppressed communities, they can see the effects of the war on drugs. And because the crack cocaine epidemic has completely devastated the African American community, not just in Seattle, but throughout the country. And so I've been working with gang involved at-risk youth for the past 20 years. And many of those youth were selling drugs, were involved in selling drugs, many of them mainly so that they can support their families, because many of them had parents who were addicted to drugs as well.
Now, I think Washington State, certainly Seattle, kind of prides itself on being reform-minded, and yet the percentage of blacks arrested and incarcerated in Washington State is enormous in comparison. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it is. Almost 60% of the inmates in Washington State are African American. You know, they're continuing to arrest and sentence young men and young women of color at a very high rate, which is the reason why I founded my organization was to work from another direction on trying to have an impact on the number of youth of color going into the prison system. And what we do is we have a youth leadership project in 5 different high schools. We want to get it into at least 10 more high schools where we work with youth at risk who are low self-esteem and work on giving them self-esteem, building up their self-esteem, helping them to encourage them to think about setting goals and going to school and teaching them about social movements. We've been very successful with our program. We also have a transitional housing program for 18 to 24-year-olds because a lot of young people, because of their parents' situation, end up homeless for a variety of reasons. So I don't think we as a community can put all our hopes in thinking that the system is going to be reformed. We have to take steps ourselves. We have to take action ourselves into reconnecting and rebuilding our communities and our family structures, and reaching out to our young people and helping them and providing them with the things they need, whether it's housing or helping to support their self-esteem, or whether it's jobs, because jobs is always a big issue. You know, there's just not enough decent jobs for young people of color that they can get into that will support them in their future. I'm an ex-felon myself, but it is such a, it really is a statement about our culture and the contradictions that exist in our culture and our society, that we would send a person to prison for a crime that committed, and we demand that they pay their debt to society, and we demand that when they get out that they do not reoffend. Yet there are so many barriers against them when they get out. You know, they can't find housing. If their parents, most of them have lived in low-income housing, they can't go live there. They can't stay there because of the laws that were passed. They can't go. They can't get financial aid to go to college because of the laws that they were passed. And many employers, just as you said, they are very, very reluctant for hiring someone who has done some time. So it's a catch-22, and it just is a tremendous statement about how contradictory our society is.
Several years ago, when I first started teaching law in New Orleans, the local TV news and newspaper ran a series about young men, primarily black, of course, in that city, living in the public housing projects. And the things that struck me about it, 2 things in particular. Every one of these kids assumed that they would do time in prison, and a lot of their games they played, a lot of their casual conversation was, how do I do my time? And the other thing, and probably the most tragic, is that most of them believe they would not live past their 21st birthday.
Wow.
I think that most of us don't even have any glimmering of the kind of dead-end lives that large numbers of our young people see in front of them. And it's a situation that makes it hard for anything good to happen.
Right, when you hear the statistic that even 1 in 3 black men is bound to end up in prison. And why is that? It's not like there's predominantly drug use among African American individuals or African American males. But yeah, it's kind of horrifying statistics. This guy, I really appreciated his interview. It was a little bit different perspective, but he is the epitome of a grassroots activist. Not only someone who sits up here and talks about it and everything, but also someone who gets involved to the point that he's running for office and he's running for election and everything. And he's bringing those issues about. I thought that's what Kinky Friedman, that was one of the, as fun of a politician and as much so I would have liked to see him win and see how he changed Texas. The least thing he did was to bring those type of politics to the forefront of Texas media. Whether he engaged his fellow candidates in that type of debate or not, he certainly made it aware that this is something that U.S. citizens talk about and think about, and brought it to the media forefront for a little while.
Oh, I want to bring up something else, and this is a place where, to at least some extent, I have to give the federal prison system a little bit of credit.
Really?
If you take most state prison systems, all of them that I know of, but there might be exceptions, when a person has served their time, they're taken to the door, they're given a new outfit of clothing and $100 or $200 and said, goodbye, don't come back again, be sure and report to your parole officer. So there they are on the street corner with no job, no support system, no place to live, and in order to get a job, be productive, or we'll lock you up again. The federal system, at least in theory and to some extent in practice, can take someone for the last 6 months of their sentence, move them to a halfway house in their original community or close by, for that 6 months, give them a place to live, a support system, help in finding job interviews, ways to manage the bus system to get to and from those job interviews, and even after they get the job, they give their paycheck for room and board to continue the period. I mean, it makes a big difference. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I wanted to just talk about the fact that we're putting people in prison when we know there are very strong links between mental health disorders and the behavior that we're putting them in prison before. And we know that about 20% of the people who are drug addicted suffer from serious mental illness. We know that a lot of these people were born with various situations that develop dependency, sometimes before they're 10 or 15 years old. And we have the money to put them in prison, but we don't have a system that addresses adequate mental health care. And it would seem that when we have sense enough to have the major person or group that deals with this problem is called SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. And we know that's reflected in the way we talk about it.
Right.
Back at a governmental level.
It's classified as addiction. Thank you so much for calling, caller. The one thing I will agree with him, the one thing, and this may be construed from what he said, is that as opposed to locking people up and putting that as no form of rehabilitation, for those people who are addicted or for those people who have some type of mental disorder or something, prison is no place to be putting them. Rehabilitation, we have these type of programs to prevent the revolving door policy for federal prisons to reintegrate felons into society. I think there should be more of that, but also it's just ask any psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, counselor, anything. There's no way that prison is a type of rehabilitative process.
Most states that are honest with themselves will admit that their state prisons are the largest unit in their state mental health program. In most states, probably 20 to 40% at least of identified sufferers from mental illness are in prisons rather than any other kind of treatment milieu. Yet no state does an adequate job of providing therapy or treatment or medication for people that are locked up that way. And the tragic thing about it, the ridiculous thing about it, is that at the very least, incarceration costs at least twice as much a year as even the most expensive, intensive kind of therapy would. The real problem for a long time in this country and in Europe as well, we very seriously asked the question of why do people commit crimes? Why do people have trouble in their lives? During the 1980s, during the Reagan years in particular, we replaced thinking about things with bumper stickers, and we came up with this idea that people do bad things because they're bad people, and since they're bad people, they ought to be punished, and that's all there is to it. And the result is we have lost any sense at all of trying to figure out and work with causation. And let's face it, if all you do is walk behind the elephant with a shovel, you're always going to have a big mess to clean up.
Nice analogy. And it looks like we have another caller. Hi, welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Hi, how y'all doing?
Good.
Good.
Can I just have to turn the television on?
Okay.
Do you have a particular question related to the show or comment?
Yes. My name is David, and I'm an ex-drug user.
Yes, sir.
I did almost 10 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and the rehabilitation, what you get in that is what you put into it. I had the privilege of part of my parole stipulation was to go to a therapeutic community up in Kyle, Texas, which former governor, the late Ann Richards, she started.
Ann Richards tried to do a lot of things along that line, yes.
Right.
I just wanted to say that I thank God that that I went to that drug rehab, because had I got straight out of TDC, there's no doubt in my mind I'd be dead or locked back up.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say to your viewers that this therapeutic community taught a sense of responsibility and accountability, and they made the inmates hold one another accountable, unlike TDC. And I thank God, like I said, that I went through there, because it was just so much that I wasn't aware of. And and drugs are not people's problems. People have a behavior, because here I was locked up for 8.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I still had these, and I was drug-free, alcohol-free, but I still had these behaviors that I didn't know how to deal with. And what that program did, it pointed that out. It made me look inside. It pointed out, and it taught me how to deal with it. And what they did, they made the part of this program, this 9-month program, they made the inmates at this facility hold one another accountable for their actions. Okay. And so that made a difference in my life. And I just thank y'all for taking this time.
Right,
thank you for calling.
I like that call. I really appreciate hearing that kind of side of it, that there is a chance and everything. You were going to say something?
I was going to say that he said it so well, it's really hard to add to it. But I will say this, that he mentioned that he went through a therapeutic community for a period of 9 months. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's become fairly apparent over the about 80 years that we've really been looking at drug users in rehab is that simply going through physical withdrawal or cutting off the source of the drugs doesn't solve any problems. That a 1 week or even a 1 month long, I don't care how often Brittany and Lindsay Lohan check in, 1 month isn't going to make much difference. That most of the successful therapies usually take 6 months to a year, and to some extent, the longer it takes, the more effective they are. But as the caller said, it's a question in most cases, and here we're excluding a large number where there is a definite physical medical problem as well. But it does mean a complete reorientation of one's life, and frankly, prisons don't do much good about that.
Right. Right. We actually have another caller, so let's go ahead and take that.
Hello, caller. Welcome to Drug Crime and Politics.
Hi, Buford. This is Dean. I just wanted to add 2 more cents to the show. I think it's a great discussion, some knowledgeable guests calling in. And I wanted to add one thought to that last gentleman. I'm glad that he had that opportunity to gain the treatment.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing I really want to add is that I think since he had that opportunity, the Texas Department of Corrections has reduced and in many ways diminished the availability of treatment both in behind bars and upon release. They just don't have the money anymore because this drug war's costing so much. Thank you.
Right. Okay, I'd like to add 2 things to what Dean said. The first is that of the within prison treatment beds that were authorized under Ann Richards' governorship, fewer than half of them were ever built. The next governor quickly shoved them off over into regular prison beds. And the other is, I keep asking myself the question of why the hell did this guy have to sit in prison for 8.5 years before going into a 9-month therapy program?
Right.
I mean, there's a real question there in my mind.
Was he in state or federal prison?
That would be state prison.
Okay.
And I'm not going to paint the state prisons totally bad, because some of them have done some incredibly good things. Many of the systems really try to get something working. Most of them, the problem is they're under such a money and prisoner crunch. They're so dominated by law and order enforcement only personalities that they've really never had a chance to get their acts together on it.
Right.
But there are people even within the systems that do try to make a difference.
Right. We actually had a guest on here from Narconon, which is obviously not involved with a prison system, but it's the same type of therapeutic community in order to rehabilitate people, ex-prisoners. One thing I was wondering is, especially with state prisons, aren't most of them privately owned, and so there's no incentive to provide that type of...
Not most of them, but with the real buildup in prison population in the 1990s particularly, several corporations got into the business of building private prisons and then operating them for states on a contract basis. And we just had a scandal break loose in this state, a private prison in this state that was housing inmates from one of the upper Midwestern states. An inmate died under rather tragic conditions. They went in to inspect and found, frankly, it sounded like something out of the Middle Ages. At best, it was the kind of thing that Dickens could describe. Their incentive is to make a profit.
Right.
And since the only way they can get a contract is for them to run the prison cheaper than the state can do it themselves, for them to make a profit, they have to cut corners everywhere. And I mean, these private prisons are places where food is substandard, sanitation and cleanliness are non-existent, even custodial care is minimal, and the idea of they're conducting any kind of program at all, just forget about it.
Right.
The whole private
prisons
industry is a scandal. And here I may be showing my own political leanings, but quite frankly, yeah, there are some things government can privatize. Contractors build great roads. But any time we have a government program that affects the rights or lives of citizens, then the government should do it. These should not be contracted out to the lowest bidder.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Now, that's been my political high horse. I want to thank our callers tonight. You had so much good things to say that unfortunately we didn't get to our last film clip, but that gives us something else to talk about later. And I wanted to say a few words about Al Gore III that you mentioned at the start of the show.
Right.
As I understand it, Mr. Gore was the son of the former vice president, was stopped for a traffic offense. And parenthetically, I'd like to know what kind of gas mileage a prize gets at 100 miles an hour, but that's a different story. The allegations are that when he was stopped, they found him in possession of Xanax, Valium, Vicodin, and Adderall. I don't know if those allegations are true or not. I don't know anything about the young Mr. Gore, although a family spokesman has alluded to his personal problems. But the allegations point out two of the major problems in our current drug policy. The first is he was possessing 4 different kinds of drugs, and they are all radically different. I mean, Xanax is an anti-anxiety medicine. Valium is primarily a muscle relaxant. Vicodin is an opiate painkiller. And Adderall is amphetamine, just like that nasty meth we hear about. It's used to treat hyperactivity. There's no such thing as a bad drug. He didn't have any of the evil monsters. He didn't have cocaine. He didn't have heroin.
He had the legal.
There's no such thing as a bad drug, but that's what our laws are based on, is that we can outlaw certain drugs. The second thing is most people that seem to have drug problems have problems with multiple drugs. I mean, here's someone with both a stimulant, Adderall, and a depressant, Vicodin. It's hard to say that the drugs cause this.
He has to balance them.
When you have things going on with both things. Anytime the drug system is based around outlaw drugs and bad drugs, it's going to cause more problem than it's worth. We have drug problems, but let's treat them as the behavioral or medical problems they are, and not hope to accomplish things by outlawing drugs. And our time has run out again. I'm so glad that the audience was interested enough to keep us busy on the telephone. We'll have to save the remaining film clips for a later time. And even though we're glad to talk to you on the telephone, remember, it's not important. If we hear from you, who needs to hear from them?
Your state legislators, as well as your federal legislators, by calling them and writing to them and letting them know how you feel about these issues.
And even your city council members, your mayor. It's your government. It's up to you, and good night.
Present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.